We also wanted to bring you an update from inside Ukraine, some of the political moves that are being made here that are really deeply troubling. Let's go ahead and put this first tear sheet up on the screen. So President Zelensky has suspended 11 political parties that they claim have links to Russia. Now, I don't doubt, let me just read a little bit of the news here and then I'll give you a little bit of my analysis. So they say the country's National Security and Defense Council took the decision to ban the parties from any political activity. Most of the parties affected were small, but one of them, the opposition Platform for Life, has 44 seats in the 450-seat Ukrainian parliament. Here's what Zelensky said. He said, the activities of those politicians aimed at division or collusion will not succeed, but will receive a harsh response. Therefore, the National Security and Defense Council decided, given the full-scale war unleashed by Russia and the political ties that a number of political structures have with the state, to suspend any activity of a number of political parties for the period of martial law. So they have, been under martial law, understandable, given that it's wartime, and he is now using martial law to ban 11 different opposition parties. Now, obviously, their rhetoric is very similar to, this idea, they're Russian-controlled, they're Russian puppets, they're pro-war, those sorts of things.
Which they might be, and in some cases appear to have very close ties to Moscow.
That may very well be the case for some of these parties. Right. But some of them have been actively anti-war. It's mostly sort of leftist, like socialist or communist parties that are being banned here outright. And notably, not the ultranationalist linked to neo-Nazis parties. Those ones are still good to go. So it's a troubling development here, and I think it matters for a couple of reasons. First of all, it matters in terms of our understanding of who Zelensky is. I've been very leery of the Zelensky hero narrative. Even if it was totally true, it's still dangerous because his interests in his country are different than our interests. So when he's aggressively out there calling for the most hawkish actions, which would in fact lead us directly into a war, we need to understand that we've got to protect our interests and we shouldn't just be doing what Hero Zelensky says. So I think this shows you that there is a lot more going on in Ukraine than has been presented in the media.
It's what makes it so complicated, which is that the media is casting this as a war of a democracy against an authoritarian state. I mean, yes, Ukraine is a democracy. It's probably more democratic than Russia. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have its own problems. And notice, we're not out here being like, Zelensky is a thug. They're both, we're not equivocating whatsoever. What we're saying is, well, it's complicated. That being said, look, the Russians still invaded the Ukrainians. So,
none of this is to justify a Russian invasion.
A lot of, in some ways, they deserve a lot of what they're getting. But the problem is that the Ukrainian government itself and the way it responds to this matters less towards us and even the Western narrative around defending democracy, but how the Russians are going to signal this inside of Russia, which is they're like, oh, look, they're persecuting these Russian peoples. They're not banning the Nazi party, the Azov battalion. So they remain affiliated with this thing which is so objectionable to the Russian people that they would then continue fighting. At the same time, if you're Ukraine, do you really want to allow pro-Russian elements to be operating in your government? I get it. The problem, and I'm not justifying it, what I'm saying is that the anti-democratic ends, this is a hallmark of warfare. And I think that is why this is really tragic, which is that we are seeing both of these states descend into total, all-out kind of a civilizational struggle. And in all of history of war, especially in that region, what you see is a massive totalitarian crackdown, consolidation of power, and the use of that sometimes to very unfortunate ends. I'm seeing reports here about the way that civilians are being treated or prisoners of war are being treated on both sides, some horrible things. And it's like, that's just simply a hallmark of war. And I'm not justifying it, writing it off. I'm like, this is what war is. When Russia decided to launch this is what they have lit. And part of the issue, though, is that we're not honestly talking about it either in order to say, hey, look, if this is a war for democracy, this is not something that you should be doing. If this is a war that you are casting yourself as a member of the West, well, if you do want actual entree into the West, he signed his EU application, this stuff can't be happening. And this is all part of why what's happening in this entire conflict is all in the gray area. And while it might be morally outrageous that the Russians have invaded, that doesn't mean the Ukrainians are perfect either. And that should also change how we view our calculus. Doesn't mean we don't support them. Doesn't mean we don't defend them. But they're not the most perfect people on earth either.
The Ukrainian cause is absolutely righteous.
And just.
And and just. And the Russians are the aggressors here, and there's absolutely no equivocating in that. And any commentary about like Ukrainians' democracy is not all that it's being presented as, none of that should be construed as any sort of a justification for what's being done to them at all. So I want to be completely clear about that. But also looking at this development, there are some echoes from our own politics, like Cold War politics, the way that, especially during Russiagate, any potential ties to Russia was used as a way to smear and dismiss people, that this is often used as a tactic to shut down any sort of left-wing opposition in particular. So, I mean, he's using war to take this to a very extreme place. But you can see the echoes of the way that this is used in our own propaganda and our own politics as well. So that's another reason why I thought it was interesting here. Let's go ahead and put this next piece up on the screen of additional actions that are being taken. Zelensky has also signed a decree that combines all national TV channels into one platform, citing the importance of a unified information policy under martial law. And if there's one thing he has been very good about, he's been very effective in his communications, with one notable exception we're about to get to in a moment with regards to Israel. But this man came up as an actor and a comedian. He knows how to communicate in a way that lands with the populations that he's talking to most often. And so this is yet another way for him to sort of shut down any potential dissenting voices and make sure that all of Ukrainian television is speaking with the message that he wants ultimately to go forward.
Yeah, and in Israel, had to bring you this because I do think he actually significantly miscalculated. Let's put this up there on the screen. Well, while Zelensky was addressing the Israeli Knesset, he says that Ukrainians helped Jews during the Holocaust. Many Ukrainians are among the righteous among the nations. He says, quote, "The people of Israel now have a choice to make." And there is actually a lot of criticism inside of Israel accusing Zelensky, who himself is a Jew, of minimizing the Holocaust and whitewashing the Ukrainians' role because, well, there was, let's just say, a lot going on there in terms of World War II and the Nazis. And let's put this next one up there on the screen, which is that if you go ahead and peruse what exactly the Israeli reaction to this, it's been a significant error. Zelensky has been trying, as he notes here, to tailor his speeches to appeal to various national audiences, like Martin Luther King in 9/11 here in the US, or when addressing the UK, evoking Churchill. But invoking the Holocaust in Israel was really, I think, a bridge too far, and he appears to have pissed off a significant amount of actual politicians in Israel to that end, especially because Israel, and I'll be talking about this in my monologue, is pursuing a strategic sovereign foreign policy here. They are not wanting to take as much, to take a significant side. They're one of the mediating partners whenever it comes to the peace deal, along with Turkey, because they have good relations with Russia. They have a huge Russian population. And so Zelensky trying to force them to take a side has had some interesting consequences. I also just have to say this because it's hilarious. Adam Kissinger tweeted yesterday that he was like, Israel must take a stand. They must make a choice. Their support for Ukraine will then make contingent U.S. support to Israel. And I was like, oh, interesting. I was like, Adam Kissinger has neoconned himself so hard that he is now like aligned with skeptical elements of arming Israel no matter the consequences. So that's interesting. Yeah. Kind of a hilarious development.
It's very unusual horseshoe there.
Yeah, that is a true horseshoe.
Like the neocon leftist horseshoe, that one almost never happens. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say here. I think that there were some much more effective ways to shame Israel and they do deserve to be shamed here in a certain sense. I mean, for example, the entire region has been mostly taking in a lot of Ukrainian refugees, and Israel has been notable in turning away people who are coming in. I mean, the very first day they set an extraordinarily limited, it was like 5,000 people of non-Jewish Ukrainians who were allowed to enter the country. That was exhausted on day one. And so, you know, for a people who obviously were persecuted over many, many years, and who famously, in one of the most shameful moments in our own World War II history, turned away when they were seeking refuge, to then close their doors to the Ukrainian people because of, you know, their own sort of commitment to being an ethno-state, I think that deserves to be publicly shamed. And then the other thing that is interesting here, and you can read this a lot of different ways, but the Ukrainians asked for their Iron Dome missile defense system, which we helped to create. I mean, we're like part owner in this thing, and apparently put some pressure on the Israelis as well to provide this. And they were like, nah, we're not going to do that.
Well, to be honest, I hate to say it, but that actually, I think that would be kind of an offensive move, both on Israel's part and on the U.S. part. But look, I actually don't begrudge Israel for not choosing a side here, because they are making some significant diplomatic progress. And at the end of the day, a sovereign country's job is in order to pursue its sovereign interest. And that's what I would say that has really rankled the U.S. It is part of a broader discussion of, it's kind of interesting that all the Middle Eastern client states that we have don't do anything that we ask them to do when it comes to a crisis, which may have some questions around why exactly we give them complete and total unconditional support no matter what. But that is a different discussion for another day.
Yeah, well, we're going to continue that discussion with Murtaza Hussein later on in the show, so we'll get back to that.
Absolutely. Hey guys, we're going to be totally upfront with you. This is the most perilous time that we have ever operated in.
It is so difficult just to try to sort through the news, but even more importantly, to bring you accurate information as this wave of lockdown and censorship spreads across the nation.
Yeah, look, if you can become a premium subscriber today at breakingpoints.com, you're going to help us build out a vibrant, independent media ecosystem which is free of mainstream pressure. We can't tell you how important that is at a time like this.
Yep, that's right. Go to breakingpoints.com to subscribe. We love you guys, and we appreciate you so much.